So it makes it credible then to me that the Soviets were worried about what the Americans would think with this assassination attempt.
Which again, I have to ask, what kind of shitty cover is this? Because what travel agents leave the kids in the middle of the night?
I know a former KGB agent who was stationed in Washington in the 80s during the height of it, who recruited a Carter's assistant and a journalist.
And in the background of us recording this episode tonight, it's Tuesday, April 7th. Donald Trump has been threatening genocide and annihilation of all the people of Iran. In this episode, it's centered around the assassination attempt of Ronald Reagan and the possibility that this could have led to war.
Both sides have their finger on the trigger. One mistake, that's all it takes.
Russia, I indicated, is a geopolitical foe.
You know, the Cold War's been over for 20 years.
Make sure I don't do any spying around here.
No, you better not.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000.
The 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of the Illegals, the Americans Rewatch Podcast on the Mayday Network. I am Michelle Kinney. I am here with Julie Roginsky, Craig Miller, Jeff Jarvis, and Olga Lautman. We're going to talk about episode 4 called In Control. I feel like the title of this episode, you could put any punctuation after the words in control, a question mark, an exclamation point, and they all kind of would be accurate. And in the background of us recording this episode tonight, it's Tuesday, April 7th. Donald Trump has been threatening genocide and annihilation of all the people of Iran. In this episode, it's centered around the assassination attempt of Ronald Reagan. It happens over one 24-hour period, and the events that followed. Obviously, this is like a fictional storyline that we're following, but based on real events. And the possibility that this could have led to war. I don't know if that's real or not, that aspect of it, but Julie and Olga, I'd love to know your thoughts first. Did that happen? Did the United States immediately think that it could have been the Russians that was trying to assassinate Ronald Reagan, or is that just part of this show?
I don't know, Olga. I don't know if you know. I mean, it stands to reason that they would obviously have to run down those traps, right, to see potentially whether this was a foreign interested party of some sort, because that's what people assumed the assassination of JFK was. And to this day, people still debate whether that was a intelligence operation in 1963. So I assume the same kind of rationale would be happening in 1981. Jeff, I think you and I keep saying are the only ones who were alive during this time period. Do you recall whether that was a narrative publicly as to whether this could be a foreign op, or I don't
recall that. I mean, I'm going to ask you another Russian question in a second. I think it got out pretty quickly that Hinckley was a nut job.
Yeah.
Right.
And so
Jodie Foster, right? Yeah.
It didn't take long. And what's interesting about the show is there was the fog of war and the fact that it was first reported that Brady was dead. And he was not. And so I think that was accurate to the time. But let me ask you both a different question. I was raised in a Republican household. I managed to overcome that. And so the trope, what I was raised with on the Cuban Missile Crisis, is what I want to go to now, is, no, there was no big deal. It wasn't going to happen. Kennedy didn't do anything special, because they didn't want to kind of give Kennedy credit. I realized as I was older, my Republican parents were saying that. I'm very curious to hear what was the view from Russians, from Soviets, about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I think that informs this discussion then.
I can tell you my father was serving in the Soviet military in 1963, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, guarding nukes that were, he was north of Arctic Circle in the military. And he said that they were told that the nukes were aimed somewhere at the United States, but did not know where. So to them, the Cuban Missile Crisis was certainly real. And my mother, who would have been a teenager at that point, I guess, almost 20, said that there was a real fear of nuclear war in Moscow then. So I think it was the real deal.
I'll just add that the Soviets, and this continues to today, they literally, it's embedded in the DNA, the paranoia. And this has been through forever, centuries, I would say, of that someone is always out to get them. They always, the regimes, whether it was the Tsars, whether it's, communist, whoever was in control, whether it's a Putin regime, the way they survive is by having an external enemy. And of course, the United States and Britain have always been an excellent enemy for them. And this is how they survive. And they feed this, paranoia to the people. And actually, this is something I said after the full-scale invasion. I remember telling a few people here that, the way we can get back at the Russians is using their paranoia against them, because it is one thing, one of their biggest weaknesses. But with that said, they feed literally the way they kept power and kept order is by making sure that everyone was worried that a nuclear missile was about to land any moment. And this is something that, whether it's my grandparents, my parents, this is what they believed. And now you have the same thing. I mean, Putin is running the same operations as the Soviets did, with this threat that NATO is about to launch, missiles into Moscow, and that the United States is about to, attack Russia, and that they need to protect the Russian people. So, I mean, it's all carried over into this. So absolutely, they would have believed, that it was very real. And what's funny now is, as things were escalating after Russia's full-scale invasion, and there were discussions of, nuclear weapons, people from the Soviet Union, including my family, the first fear was, oh my God, what if a nuclear weapon is launched? I'm like, it's not going to be here. If it happens, it's going to go to Ukraine, a tactical nuclear. But it was still like embedded, that fear of this, nuclear war happening. And here we are now on the eve where literally today the discussion was that Trump, who is another one who has weird fear since the 80s, maybe from his first wife, Ivana, over nuclear weapons. Today, the discussion was, people in his cabinet or whatever, anonymous sources were saying he was contemplating using a nuclear weapon in Iran. So it's, that's what I would say. Yes, I would believe it.
So it makes it credible then to me that the Soviets were worried about what the Americans would think with this assassination attempt, and that it could have triggered things. It's the fact that the heat was pulled off in the plot of the show is just so damned accidental. Oh, the neighbor came over and told us, yeah, he's nuts.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Never mind. We were right. Yeah. And we didn't report this bad stuff we thought we had. And we avoided World War III by the chance of suburban life in Virginia. That's the show. But the credibility before that, I think, does make sense in this context. Thanks for that.
It makes me think of the show, the HBO show Newsroom. If anybody at home doesn't know the show, it's based on a major cable news network, and each episode is surrounds some sort of historic news event. And this kind of made me think of that, and the fact that these are real events, but like not real people, and fiction, in terms of the fact that we have these two Russian spies that are in a van outside the Secretary of Defense's house, and they not accidentally, they shoot the poor guy who's like patrolling
neighborhood watch guy, yeah.
Poor bastard. But the episode begins though, and this is where like that marriage part comes in.
Yeah.
Because Joe Weissman, who created the show, talked about this, and I've read about that. In the beginning, he set out to make a show about marriage, and in the background of all of this are lots of different storylines between Elizabeth and Philip, but also Stan and his wife. But in the beginning, this is the kind of the beginning of the romantic setup, sort of with Elizabeth and Philip for the first time, kind of falling in love with each other, I guess. And they're in a hotel and they're like,
a nooner.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
A nooner.
Yes. And they're getting it on, and then they leave, and that's when they see the news of what has happened with Ronald Reagan, this assassination attempt. And the first thing that goes through their mind is the same thing, I guess, that any Russian would have. Oh no, was this us? And it's interesting also to look at Paige and her reaction to all of this, because they kept playing the same few seconds of the footage, the news footage, over and over and over again. And she said, why do they keep having to show it over and over again? It's ghoulish. She uses the word ghoulish.
What are they supposed to show?
I don't know, but there's just something ghoulish about constantly showing this.
Ghoulish?
I mean, it's not going to change just because they showed it over and over and over. Oh my God, finally the bullet missed.
And it makes me think of, well, first of all, her ability to disassociate, I guess, a little bit of like the gravity of what had happened, but also we think of 9/11 and so many other events that we've experienced, where it does kind of feel ghoulish, but like, do we have to be looking? I don't know. That was kind of.
I don't know if TV looped as much then as it does now.
Yeah.
I mean, the looping now is just constant without context, and clearly in an event like this, it broke into broadcast TV.
Right.
So your soap opera wasn't on and so on. So that gave it a gravity that is beyond what you have now. And let's turn to CNN or MS Now. But I don't know whether they looped the video as quite as much as they said that they did.
At the beginning, Michelle, you said the episode is titled In Control. I think you mentioned that, right? Like, is Elizabeth in control at the beginning with their sexual rekindling, right? But then Philip becomes in control near the end where he says, I should do this. Are the Russians in control of the narrative? Is the FBI in control because they're trying to get Nina out of the embassy, right? So like, there's so many twists. You said, is it exclamation point, question mark?
Yeah.
But during that whole scene, the thing I thought after, they found out Reagan was shot was, right now, today, they would have all gotten an alert on their phone. Like, they didn't know technically for those 20 minutes until they walked downstairs. And I just thought that was fascinating as a rewatch to remember that, news wasn't on 24/7. So as Jeff, you were saying, breaking news came in to broadcast and probably took over the soap operas. But now that doesn't happen on broadcast because we just have a constant 24/7 news cycle and everyone has news on their phone. And I found that really interesting as well.
We talked about this the last couple of times, but every time I see Paige, I gotta wonder who the hell is watching the kids, like running around the woods, sending code back, at 2:00 in the morning, and digging up, God knows what that
bombs,
pattern of weapons, like so many
a cache of weapons. And I'm like, who's home with the kids? Because the kids aren't that old. And also I was watching this and I was like, what was the word that Paige used? She said it was ghoulish. And I'm like, that's quite a sophisticated word for how old is she? 13?
Yeah.
So I think the least realistic part about the show is the kid situation. Like, what's going on with the kids?
It's kind of ever thus in television. The kids are there when convenient and ignored when not.
Right.
Although I have to say, in the 80s, when I was growing up, and especially by the 90s when I was a teenager, I used to roam around the neighborhood. Like, the rule was come home when the lights go dark.
Yeah.
Like, there were no phones, there were nothing. And then a few times, I didn't come home, and my mom would drive around the neighborhood like a lunatic, circling and circling, looking for me.
Like, Olga, where are you?
Where were you? Olga, where were you then?
That's true, Olga. On behalf of your mom, we have to ask, where the hell were you?
But for the most part, it was very free, unlike now. Although the kids now are weird because, like, my son, he'll go out. He's a teenager, but I mean, he spends way more time in the house, like with PlayStation than I did. Like, we didn't sit in the house. Like, we got out of school and straight out, and that's it, and came home like at dinner time.
Home was boring. Now we have the world.
Yeah, but I would still say, and I had the same kind of upbringing, but I still don't recall my parents ever leaving the house. I mean, I'd be panicked if I woke up in the middle of the night. My parents.
Exactly. That you're right. 100%.
Yeah. And so that's that whole situation. Every time I watch that, I'm like, okay, that's a little bit of a plot hole here.
And the neighbors were more engaged then. Like, everyone knew each other in the neighborhood. And the fact that the neighbors don't see their car pulling out at like 2 a.m., coming home at 4 a.m., and no one's questioning what a travel guy is doing at like 2 a.m. with his wife while they're leaving the house.
Yeah, especially when Stan says, "I'm the one who's the watcher. I'm not the one who's being watched." It's like, really, dude? Because you have suspicions about your neighbors across the way, and yet under your nose they're leaving at 2 a.m.
Right,
paying attention. So I think that's kind of a plot hole there too, but I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. Otherwise, it's a good episode.
I want to go back to Elizabeth because I think it's such an amazing contrast. Is that she's romantic at the beginning in the nooner, and then she's just absolutely cold-bloodedly shoots the neighborhood watch guy, just on a hair trigger.
And the way her face changes when she hands over the ID, and she's like this, and all of a sudden, like, killer face, and she walks over and does the thing and then puts like a napkin on his head. I was like, ooh, that's not the first time you've done that.
I need to call this in.
Is there any way you can do it?
No can do. Company policy. Parked along the side of the road. Won't take more than 15 minutes, I promise.
You know what I mean?
But I do think they address that in the show. They show her as a kid, right, with her mother not accepting all of those goods from that man who I don't know who that is, but obviously they were trying to bribe her. And, I think I wrote a note. And so like her mom was something like, you have to only take care of yourself. Yep. And when it comes down to it, you're only taking care of yourself. And so you see her in that moment. Yes, she's thinking of her family. She's thinking of Russia, but like she's also saving herself, and she does what she needs to do to survive. And I think they addressed that a little bit back then when they showed that her mom didn't accept those goods and trying to get bought off. So
I actually want to fill that in because that part stuck out to me because of exactly what happened a few years ago. That part was actually her father probably died. Her father was probably KGB. Yep. And with the security services, when one of theirs fell, they would come visit the house and they would try to bribe them. At that time, it was food. This time, it's money and prostitutes and everything else. At that time, the Soviets didn't have money, so there would be kolbasa, which is sausages and foods that didn't exist in regular supermarkets. Basically, they were trying to get her recruited. And the whole thing was to bring these delicatessens that don't exist in supermarkets, and the only people who had delicatessens at the time were the Politburo and the KGB. To bring that basically to, and apparently it worked somewhere down the line because she did get recruited. And what's interesting is that after Putin started the full-scale invasion in the Far East, they were recruiting basically cannon fodder for the front lines in Ukraine. And they literally, I'm not kidding, they were offering a bag of fucking potatoes and onions to send your loved one to go and die on the front lines. And I'm thinking, and I'm like, some habits don't die because they literally were offering the same thing. And for the people who did die, they actually gave them like lots of potatoes and onions, and some got like a Lada car, which I don't frankly know who wants a Lada car, but some would get like a Lada car as compensation that for the people who died, who they acknowledged, because out of the 1.5 million casualties, Russia's acknowledged, I think, maybe 10,000 or 12,000, I think. I don't think they acknowledge that many.
That's so interesting, Olga, that you say that, because I took another note that, they said Henry doesn't have to worry about this. And Paige goes, no, it's history which repeats itself. So Henry does have to worry about it.
Hey, Dad, when were 37 million people killed?
You don't have to worry about that.
It's history, which repeats itself, so he does have to worry about it.
And I thought that was an interesting nugget, especially as you mentioned, Michelle, it's Tuesday and Trump tweeted all those insane things today, and just like history repeating itself is kind of a scary thought as well.
The other interesting thing, I think, is that they were showing the death of Stalin, right, when he showed up. So that was 1953, as I think that's the year.
Oh, I didn't put that together.
Yeah.
Okay.
So she would have been, I think she was born I think we did the math. I think we said that she was born in 1940. So she would have been 13, right?
Yeah.
And she said she was recruited when she was 17 or 18. When did she say she was recruited? I think she said she was recruited when she was 17 earlier in the show. So she was recruited in the late 50s. And what was going on the day that Stalin died, which was a little, she said that she wasn't born in Moscow, right? She said she came from another town, not Moscow. The amount of mourning that was going on the day that Stalin died. First of all, they would not just be quietly sitting around contemplating life. The amount of mourning and the amount of sorrow was so deep and so vast, because this guy was the father of the country. They had been so brainwashed to believe that he was just this incredible, it's kind of what they're trying to do with Trump now on the MAGA side, but on steroids. Like, he was like, it was an atheist country, but he was the equivalent of like the Messiah. Again, I want to bring up my mother. She and her mother went to Stalin's funeral because they were in Moscow, and everybody went to Stalin's funeral. This wasn't like even an option. They almost got trampled to death. Like, literally, I forgot the thousands of people who died at that funeral, but people were trampled to death in one of the biggest mass casualty events of Russian history.
God.
Yeah. It was just so, like, that part, again, I feel like whoever did the research on that show a little bit kind of missed the mark as to what was going on. The kind of cavalier attitude that they had about, I guess they're trying to do the comparison between Stalin's death and Reagan's almost death, but the reality.
And also Philip bringing that up, right? Because later on in the episode, right, they're listening to the recording from the Secretary of Defense's house, and Elizabeth, I almost like Carrie Russell, Felicity, Elizabeth is saying, like, you don't get it. There's you heard the stuff about Haig. He's got the nuclear football. This is a coup, and Philip says, you still don't get it. We've been here long enough to understand how these people operate. You still don't get it. And he said, and she said something about the motherland, or I still know where I came from. And basically he's saying, like, I do too. When our leaders die, no one will even admit that they are dead for weeks.
All these years walking these streets, living with these people, you still really don't understand this place.
But I remember where I came from.
I know how the Americans do things, but the last 2 times our leaders died, our government pretended they weren't dead for weeks. Things are different here.
So that really kind of stuck with me too, especially in the moment we're living in now, when, over the last couple of weeks when Julie's been out, every time I do a live or something, I kind of have to, check myself, because I'm like, I don't know what we can believe that's even coming out of this White House, what's coming, what they're telling the news. You have to question everything now. And I feel like we're kind of living in this alternate reality that, these so many other countries have had to deal with, mass propaganda coming out of their government is kind of like the environment we're in now.
But Michelle, now that you mentioned it, the thing I liked best about this episode was that even Philip realized that Alexander Haig was a clown. And that moment was clownish. Right. Who are you kidding that? No,
right.
Come on. Right. Don't be ridiculous. Right. And we could still laugh off such clowns.
Right.
In that day. And
After
we can't
January
anymore
6th,
because the clowns are in charge of the circus. Right.
Right.
For sure.
I'll just add that for me, the main part of this episode is the collision of mentalities. Because going back to that, the Soviets thought there's a coup happening here. The Americans thought that the Soviets, well, rightfully so, I'm sure they had reason to think that the Soviets were involved with a potential assassination of Reagan. But for the Soviets, like, they were on high alert and they thought that there was a coup coming here. And that is because they don't understand how America works, how the American mentality works, how the American government functions. And it is the same thing now. I mean, really, if I had a penny for every time I screamed when I heard a government official, whether it was Biden officials, Jake Sullivan or Blinken or others, discussing like, oh my God, Putin needs to stop and think, how many Russians have died in Ukraine. And I'm like, are you kidding? Like, their mentality, the more people that die, the more patriotic you are. Like, literally to this day, like half of the year is devoted to the great patriotic war where millions perished to defend the motherland. And if you are not dying for the motherland, then you basically are worthless. And whereas with Americans, we saw how, leave no man behind. Like, they will go and rescue every person, every American military person, and they want to minimize casualties. They don't need, people to die in the military to prove their loyalty to the country. Just serving, does it. And here, it shows even to now. I mean, the Americans do not understand the Russian mentality if you pay them. I mean, whether it's the Trump regime, I don't even like counting this because he's useless. But whether it's the Biden administration, Obama, Bush administration, Clinton, like, they don't understand the mentality. And, and this goes to the bigger picture that once the Cold War ended, the Americans celebrated and patted themselves on the back like we won the Cold War. But if you spoke to any regular Russians, they had this anger and humiliation and kind of this, thing that we will get our revenge one day, which is the premise of what happened when Russia started interfering and attacking elections across Europe, across the United States, because they blamed, us for the collapse of the Soviet Union. And just that whole part, with the coup reminded me of this, that the Soviets, have this whole bizarre thing. And same thing, even when the Soviets attacked our election, yes, they were successful in some ways, but they still didn't understand the American mentality. And this is why, for instance, in 2020, they didn't put as much effort in trying to get Trump reelected. They did run some operations, but they figured that Trump is in power, he'll do everything to hold power, because they don't understand, like, once someone is in power, like, how is it that your agencies aren't going to keep you in power, because it's unheard of in Russia.
But I think if, to Craig's point, you said, how the show started off with her being kind of romantic with Philip, and then towards the end, she's yelling at him and kind of, accusing him of wanting to being soft. I think where that changed was the conversation with Claudia, because Claudia kind of brought her back to the motherland, so to speak, by basically saying, I fought at Stalingrad. Now, Stalingrad was the most bloody war, World War II, for the Russians. Mass casualties. I mean, Stalingrad is like hell. If you think about two places, if you talk to Russian people about World War II, one is the siege of Leningrad, where people literally starved to death. Millions of people basically had to resort to cannibalism because of the siege of Leningrad. And the other is Stalingrad, same thing. And if you fought behind enemy lines of Stalingrad, which Claudia said she did for 2 years, I mean, it's like being in the French resistance times 10,000.
I fought behind enemy lines in Stalingrad 2 years. I didn't have any experience training, none of what you have.
And so I think whether she said that to Elizabeth, whether that's true, or whether she said that to Elizabeth just to remind her of what she's in it for, I think at that point is when Elizabeth said, okay, forget it. This whole notion of romanticism, this whole notion of being this American couple, of being soft with my husband, of whatever, that's not what I'm here for.
I think you're right. Again, it's in the context of when we're talking about this. Trump saying that he can bomb people into regime change and revolution and so on, and it does the opposite. Just what you were saying, Olga.
Right.
It does the opposite. It instills a protection of one's country, and the same thing happened with. I mean, the British thought that by bombing the hell out of Germany, they were going to break the back of German resolve, and the opposite was true. It increased resolve, and so I think we do see in that moment of Elizabeth's scales coming off her eyes, that an essential character coming out. Yes,
in that scene, where basically Philip is saying we need to do things our way. He says, "You're always saying how dangerous things are and how we're at the edge of war. It is our job to make sure that that doesn't happen."
You're the one who keeps saying how dangerous things are and how we're at the edge of war. I say our job is to try and stop that from happening. And you know what we're going to do? For once, we're going to do it my way.
A couple things. Number one, it makes you think about how many times throughout history there have been people like that who have, stepped in quietly behind closed doors in the shadows and stopped things from escalating that we'll never know about. We'll just never know. But also this kind of brings it back to the marriage thing too, because Elizabeth at the end kind of, sheepishly kind of comes up behind Philip after he puts out the message that their FBI source, quote unquote, confirms that Hinckley was a nut job and everything. And she says, basically, I'm glad that we did things your way. And they were very lucky to have you on the ground. It made me think about in marriage, in any relationship, how important and powerful it is to admit when you are wrong.
I'm glad we did it your way this time. The center was lucky to have you on the ground today.
That was something Elizabeth could do in that moment. And could she have done that before? I don't know. Because she was kind of like, their attitude towards each other, the whole episode was kind of like, but you did this and you did this and no. But at the end, they come together and compromise when across the street, Stan is having a different kind of conversation. Instead of coming together in this moment, they're drifting apart.
You never talk to me. Why is it so hard?
I don't know how to.
How to what?
It just doesn't feel like it did before.
Which I thought was interesting also.
So they could have, as you're talking, Michelle, I'm thinking that they could have triggered World War III if they had shot at the house, if they had shot a cabinet member at the house, right? That would have been, a next step of an escalation. And Elizabeth scolding him at first, I'm sorry I'm coming back to today's news, but it comes back to the question of following illegal orders.
Right.
Orders that are harmful, the responsibility that you have at that moment, the agency that you have and can have an impact. It's more relevant than I would have thought when I watched this episode a week ago.
And there was a quote on the show, to go back to the quotes, and it says, both sides have their finger on the trigger. One mistake, that's all it takes.
Both sides have their fingers on the trigger, and that's how it happens.
How it happens?
One mistake, that's all it takes.
Yeah,
right? And again, today, did somebody stop Trump from doing something stupid? Like you said, Elizabeth wanted to go crazy and Philip kind of reeled her in that time. So I thought that was interesting. But I also love watching this with, Olga and Julie and thinking about Russia, because, Michelle and I were born in the early 80s. And so maybe I was daydreaming during school or something, but I didn't realize Russia had such a big impact on World War II. Like I thought, Japan, Italy, and Germany were the evil.
We aren't really taught it.
But we're not. Were we taught that, Michelle? Because it doesn't ruin anything. But in season 6, they reference how many people died in World War II from Russia, and how compared to the US,
20 million.
Yes, and I was shocked. I had to Google it. I was like, that cannot be real. I've never heard of this. I never learned that. And it's just interesting to me because we grew up in elementary school during the Cold War. So were we purposely not hearing this information? Were they, I don't know, but I never knew Russia had such a big part in kind of helping defeat in World War II.
Yeah. Other than my pen pal that I had in Moscow in 1990, which is a whole nother story, but I had a pen pal when I was in the 3rd grade. But I mean, I didn't really know much except for like Russia bad, Russia bad. And that's kind of it. But, I took AP European history. I took AP US history. Like, I don't remember ever hearing much about the Russians at all during this period. And it's not to say that we weren't taught it at all. I'm sure it was mentioned somewhere, but like really at the forefront of any of the lessons that we learned about World War II was, Europe and the Pacific. Like that was it.
That's how I feel. Wow. And I think, for anyone watching this with us and, having experts like Olga and Julie on to kind of describe it, I think you watch it with a different lens now. And, I mentioned in episode 1, Olga, like I was cheering for Kerry Russell and Matthew Rhys, Philip and Elizabeth, right? Because I thought it was entertainment. And then now I started the book, The Illegals, and hearing, Olga speak about how these people don't have any, care for anybody or anything. They will do whatever it takes. I'm watching it personally from a different lens now, thinking about all the atrocities that happen and so on and so forth. So I think, having experts like you all explain this to some of maybe the casual viewers that like the show, it was entertaining. I thought, I was smart and knew history is really important because it does give that kind of credibility to understand, wow, this was heinous and it's not just a TV show, like some of this was actually happening.
I'll be like a parrot and repeat. She is a KGB agent. He is KGB. And we saw that training when she walked up without flinching, poof, and the person took their life, didn't think twice, buried them, did what they had to do. Neither thought twice about it. So at the end of the day, I'll keep repeating, as cute as this relationship is and, how they try to Americanize these illegals. The bottom line is they are illegals. They're trained, dangerous KGB operatives.
Well, it's like The Sopranos. It's like The Sopranos, right? With Sopranos, you are still talking about people who were in the mafia and killing people, irrespective of how much Tony Soprano was this lovable, Italian. But I also will say, and again, Jeff, tell me if you had the same impression in the Cold War that I did, but you are talking about a zero-sum game, I think, to some extent, where countries understood, right? One side was going to win, one side was going to lose. It was about a way of life. I mean, it was a very ideological fight. I think, it was always communism versus capitalism. And it's a very simplistic way to describe it because neither side is particularly, the platonic ideal of communism or capitalism. But nevertheless, it was about, the Russians, the Soviets really considered themselves to be ideologically superior because they believed truly, the ones who believed. By the time the show rolled around in the 80s, I don't think most people in the Soviet Union believed it, but Elizabeth and Philip would have, because they left back when this was still instilled in them in the 60s, which is that they were creating a better world. I mean, a world where people supported each other, a world where people took care of each other, and so on and so forth. Whereas we, of course, in the United States, believe that and rightly so, this was a horrible regime, and they were not free, and we were the free ones. So only one side was going to win in this calculus. And I think the problem that we made as Americans was doing a little victory lap after winning, quote unquote, the Cold War, because it's not so much that we won the Cold War, it's that the Soviets lost. I mean, we just ran out of money, to be honest. Mm-hmm. And I think that has created all sorts of problems for us down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's a continuum here. I've never been to Russia, but I spent some time in Berlin and East Berlin before the wall came down.
Mm.
And to see the war memorial, Soviet war memorial in Berlin, to go to Vienna and see the Soviet war memorial there, and to realize what happened. And if you start from World War II as allies, and then of course we all know the story of the Iron Curtain, but I don't think we gave respect sufficiently, based on what two of you said about your education, to the Soviet sacrifice in World War II. And then I think we can't forget McCarthyism in the country. And I just finished, I think it's Kings of Hollywood, which is kind of the post-McCarthy era. No, sorry, I'm reading right now the Random House biography of Bennett Cerf, and that HUAC and McCarthyism inserted itself into American culture all around, and this demonization of communism, and it made me think about the current, because autocrats need enemies. So the current regime, has chosen to make enemies of immigrants, brown-skinned people, and trans kids. Right? The thing about communists were, as the American shows, it could be any of us.
Yeah.
You can't just tell what they look like. They are insidious because they are a part of us and they're around. And I have a list, and they're in the State Department, and you're in a company, and they're all over. And that was the propaganda of my youth.
Yeah.
Was that communism was a scourge. It was a danger. We had to stop it in Vietnam. We had to stop it in Korea. I mean, this is the rationale that I grew up with. And so by the time you reach the 80s, I think that context, I know we wanted to get off the historical context of the show and get to plot points more, but I think
historical show. I mean, they use it.
It really is. I think it's important to kind of see, you're right, Julie, that we'd passed beyond a certain point, but that history was still with us. Even though McCarthy was discredited, that spirit was still with us. And so it's interesting to me that in a way the show, and Olga will get mad at me for this, is it tries to humanize Soviets. And Olga will remind us, they aren't just Soviets, they're KGB agents, and you're right. But it almost does try to say that these are human beings with flesh and blood like us.
Yeah.
And to realize that they had a mission, and we thought the mission was evil, but they thought their mission was critical. And that's where we are. But I think you're right, Julie, in the end. The Reagan tear down this wall, the desire to take credit for tearing down the Soviet Union is paying. We have to pay dividends on that now.
Forever, apparently.
Yeah. And I'll just add, just to bring back, if you read any Russian textbook, don't worry, you will not see the sacrifices that the Soviets made during World War II from other countries. The majority is focused on Russians, and they act as if it was Russia who won the World War II, and not Ukrainians and Belarusians and Kazakhs and every other country that was held hostage under the Soviet Union. Also, they will never discuss that Hitler and Stalin made a pact, and that the reason that there was any kind of, that the Soviets got involved was because Hitler basically betrayed Stalin and invaded. But had Hitler stuck to his word, then we wouldn't have seen, the heavy casualties with the Soviets, because the plan was to split Europe between the two, which is pretty much right now what's happening, with Putin. I mean, he's following in the same footsteps of taking, territory, invading in various countries, whether it was Georgia in 2008, Ukraine now, and I mean, his appetite doesn't end. If you watch Russian TV, they talk about Estonia. They even, like, for fun, throw up military maps of how they're going to take Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania in 3 days. This is something for decades.
Well, and Nixon still won the presidency by being anti-communist.
And the episode also opens when they're watching TV in the kitchen, and they're talking about Poland, and like Russians were on the border, or there's some sort of fear around that.
Tensions escalated on the Polish border as Soviet troops continued their show of force in response to growing unrest inspired by the Solidarity trade union movement. Government sources called the Russian military.
And Henry asks, "Hey, Dad, where's Poland?" And Paige walks in and goes, "It's in Russia." And Elizabeth turns around and goes, "Is that what your teacher is teaching you?" And Philip says it's in the neighborhood.
Where's Poland? It's part of Russia.
Is that what Mr. Henriksen is teaching you?
Yeah.
Same neighborhood.
I was like, wait, what? Why would an American teacher be teaching that?
As if the Soviet Union were one.
Okay.
Because it was the Soviet bloc, right? So like whether Poland or Romania or Hungary or any of these other Central European or Eastern European countries, they were still part of the Soviet bloc. So I guess if you're a teacher in 1981, maybe you don't know the difference. And frankly, what was happening in 1981 was in Poland was that they were having Russian shoved down their throat, that they were having Soviet culture shoved down their throat. You speak to any Polish person who grew up in Poland at that time, they hate Russia like they hate nobody else on earth. And understandably so. And so there is something to be said for the fact that it basically was an appendage of Russia's. 1981 happens to also be the year, I believe it was 81, maybe it was 79, the Solidarity. Lech Walesa came up, the trade unionist who started to really try to overthrow that communist regime. With Wojciech Jaruzelski, who was the last, I can't believe I'm pulling this out of my head, but the last
aggressive. I'm like,
the last communist leader of Poland. But I think the reality is that Elizabeth doesn't really discount it because she would be, because it was an empire, and she would have been pleased to think that in American schools they're teaching that Poland is part of the Soviet Union. Because while it wasn't formally part of the Soviet Union, it certainly was as Soviet adjacent as you could be.
And they do. I think in the news coverage, I remember hearing something about the trade unionist or something like that in the headline, where they were listening on the kitchen. I'm trying to
remember when Solidarity. I think it was 81, but maybe 7.
Yeah. Which, by the way, is happening to this day because with Russia and the way the regime operates. They think that everybody in the world needs to know Russian. Like they're literally shoving Russian down the throats of Africans. I mean, they're trying to bring everyone under the Russian sphere. And this just continues. This is a typical thing. What was happening under the Soviet Union still continues, except now there's more pushback.
I'm always just amazed the audacity of all of these strong men. And, Julie and I were talking about this earlier today. I was like, I am so tired of looking around and seeing Orban and Putin and Trump and like all of these like pasty,
Netanyahu, add him to the list.
All these little D-bags, like we all have to do what they say. And we all have the audacity that they think that we all want to, live like them or be like them or live under their influence or anything. And like, this really is no different. And it's just like the audacity of the whole thing is just wild to me. And thinking too, and Jeff, you were talking about McCarthyism. I was thinking the line here, who was sitting next to McCarthy during a lot of those hearings was Roy Cohn, who was Donald Trump's lawyer in the 80s, Roy Cohn, who taught him everything he knows, and here we are in 2026 with everything and, that Donald Trump knows, how he operates, how he weaves throughout the world, as a complete and utter psychopath. But the other thing, and not to, pivot too hard here, but on this day in 1981, March 30th, I also wanted to just talk quickly about the weird storyline with Paige and Matthew from across the street, because it makes me so uncomfortable. Every time they're on screen together or they're like throwing eyes at each other, I'm like, I am uncomfortable. I don't like this. I don't want to know about it. What?
How old is he supposed to be?
In high school, right?
I think like high school, like maybe 14 or 15. They're just so awkward. I just am like, oh, cringe. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, like not wanting to ever be 13 ever again. But I'm just like, oh, it's terrible.
You're typically cringe when you're 13 and you're
Yeah.
But I do think it's funny because they do say, Paige realizes that he was probably more upset because his dad is working for the FBI, and she goes, my parents are just travel agents, and he was like, oh yeah, travel agenting, I think he said, is funny.
I'm sorry. I've been thinking, the footage of that Secret Service agent, Kind of makes me think about your dad's job. My dad doesn't do stuff like that. He's just a travel agent.
Travel agenting is more dangerous than you think. Travel agenting is a world filled with peril.
Is, a world full of peril, and then they cut to Elizabeth and Philip like pulling guns out of the ground and shooting. It was a funny way that they did a funny nod, I believe, to like, hey, this is ridiculous that they're undercover as travel agents.
Which again, I have to ask, what kind of shitty cover is this? Because what travel agents leave the kids in the middle of the night?
When a strange boy could come across alone.
Yes.
I was gonna say, as we look to the next episodes, you're talking about their relationship, right? And there was a couple things in the middle, right? Because it starts with them having sex in the hotel room. Then at the very end, they have sex at the end when she says, like, you were right. Thank goodness you were here. Obviously he gets angry at her and says, we're doing it my way. But he also turns a flip because she goes, let me call Gregory and get a car. And he immediately flipped and got annoyed again.
We're going to need a government car.
I'll signal Gregory.
Annoyed again about Gregory. So
thing
it's going to be interesting to see how that continues to evolve. What happens with Gregory? All those kind of things. As this, as you said, this was originally a TV show about a relationship with the backdrop of the war, and so how are they going to continue to move that forward as we watch? Because again, we joke, I find it hard enough to find a date night with my partner because we both work all the time. Like, how are these people like going out and renting hotel rooms and having sex? Like, I don't understand. But,
they didn't have phones to take up their lives.
Yeah. Why were they? I mean, what is the significance of them going to a hotel room as opposed to doing it at home?
Making it feel
I think they're making it romantic or special, right? Like they were wooing each other because they were set up together.
Yeah, they never dated.
Kind of like, this is like a date. He showed up to the hotel.
This was like a date situation.
Yeah, she like even looked at herself in the mirror after he knocked on the door.
Oh yeah, that was kind of sweet.
Like presentable, and then opened the door. So I think it was more of the we were set up. Let's try to start from the beginning and like do something.
Yeah.
On the spycraft end, I want to go to Nina if we can for a second.
Mm-hmm.
So he calls her at the embassy. That's wacky to an extent there, but okay.
Right.
And then how it wasn't really clear to me how she escaped surveillance. And I think sometimes they do just kind of slide over inconvenient moments.
Well, she goes into
she
the
got
bar.
the message across they need to get across for the plot.
I think they must have talked about meeting near that bar because that must have been one of her covers or something, because when she walked by him, she still went to the bar and they showed those aides talking about it.
Right,
So
her listening to them.
She won't know, but she will have knowledge when she goes back about aides talking. So that must have been something off screen that they said, meet by this bar because that's my cover. And if you feel like something's off, I don't know.
But also, that's the other kind of continuity thing. I thought that Nina was just a secretary of some sort in the embassy. I didn't realize that Nina was supposed to be a spy. Like, none of that made sense to me. So when she walks into what?
A spy?
Well, the fact that she dispatched herself to go to the bar to listen to Americans.
Oh, well, right.
The fact that she walks into the ambassador's office and basically says, oh, by the way, I'm going to go and go spy on these Americans to see what I can pick up. And he's like, yeah, go ahead, no problem. And then he's like, follow her.
Василий Николаевич, на углу номер 17 есть бар, там обычно собираются помощники конгрессменов. Я думала, может, мне там стоит посидеть? Вдруг удастся узнать что-нибудь важное.
Как вернетесь, сразу доложите мне, и только мне.
Обязательно.
Давид, проследи за ней.
And that's why I think she is a secretary, because maybe she was just like, hey, let me go see what I can do. I don't know. Yeah.
They're all spies. And just to go into the 80s, since we're in the Soviet, is it embassy or consulate?
It's the embassy.
It's in Washington, D.C. Yeah. But we had a secretary here in the consulate, in the Soviet consulate, who actually, in a not so covert way, claimed to basically send the signal that she recruited Trump in the 80s. And anyone who would work in the consulate or the embassy, everyone was KGB. And to this day, anyone who from whoever opens the door in the embassy to
we don't see that. We don't see her doing that any other way, right?
Yeah.
That's the part. That's what I'm saying. Like she happens to be a note taker for every other moment of that show.
Yeah.
Except where she's suddenly going to go and eavesdrop on people. Like, we don't see her having a mission. Like, of course, but if she, but.
And maybe that's why he thought it was a little strange. Like, he does that double take and he goes, follow her, because maybe it seemed out of character that she would ask to do something like that. I don't know. But, and then also like watching her walk into that bar, I'm always like kind of taken out. And maybe this is just because we live in New York or whatever, but I know that this is supposed to be taking place in DC and they're on North 17th Street. But I was like, she walks into this thing that looks like a Blarney Stone and like Queens or something. I was like, this is in Queens or Brooklyn or something. And I'm sure it was filmed in Queens.
They definitely film everything in Red Hook is when
I was like, everything's filmed here. But yeah, and
it would have been normal though, because again, that goes back to the paranoia thing, and no one trusted anyone in the embassy, and to this day no one trusts anyone, and everyone's always looking over each other's shoulder. So the fact that she would have volunteered in this chaotic time, that's actually reasonable. You have the president of the United States shot, you have the Russian embassy or the Soviet embassy in like chaos mode, because they're worried that the Soviets are going to be blamed for this, and and for her to say, oh, let me go see if I could hear some kind of chatter. I know a former KGB agent who was stationed in Washington in the 80s during the height of it, who recruited Carter's assistant and a journalist. And
would he or she come on the show?
Wait, what?
Would that former agent come on our show?
Maybe. I could ask him. He was working out of the Soviet embassy in the 80s. And for him, it was a typical job to go and sit and listen to chatter to see what people are talking about, whether it's congressional staffers or, to go to the hot spots. And then he would take notes, he said, and then send it back to Moscow. Mm-hmm. And he was here at the prime time. He was actually here. I'll ask if he'll come on, but he actually arrived the day for his assignment that Robert Hansen went to the Soviet embassy to give his code and reinstate himself, because he was working with GRU in the late 70s, and then he went wanted to go back into it and work with the KGB. So he arrived that day and he walked into the embassy and they're like, get out of here now. And he's like, huh? And walked out because Hansen had just walked in and given his code to get reinstated. So that part would have been normal for her to go and say that. And the paranoia would have said, go look. What I think happened is that probably he saw, the other Soviet guy probably saw she walked in the bar, maybe looked in to see if she's meeting or talking to anyone, and then said, okay.
Then he went off. Okay, that makes sense to me. All right.
Let me, leave. I don't think he was meant to
that's what
follow her and stay there. Yeah.
That makes sense. The other thing about this that I just wanted to briefly touch on too, just how these moments sort of, permeate for years and years to come, is that, that James Brady was shot during this assassination attempt, and that we have the Brady Bill that was named after him, our gun control law that was signed by President Bill Clinton. And I remember vividly, I was home sick from school that day and watched him sign the bill with all his, 50 pens or whatever it was. And that's the briefing room. I believe the White House is also named after him as well. It's just, he's the person who was injured gravely, the most, but, he was impaired really for the rest of his life. And, what a huge thing that was. And the show does touch on this too. And this is a problem that our media also suffers from, is reporting things before they have everything accurate and fully sourced. And they were reporting that he was dead. Glad that he pulled through.
On that note, this was a great episode.
And
I liked it a lot. I think
Me too.
Continuity issues aside about the kids. Otherwise, really good.
Very mom is going to be a constant here. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Always
all right. Thank you to everybody for joining us, and we we'll see everybody again next week for another episode.
And if you have not already, please like and subscribe to the Mayday Network and follow along with us at the Illegals Podcast. And that's all. Thank you all so much.
Bye, everyone.
You are listening to the Mayday Network.